Rain fell over London with the cold insistence of a city eager to wash its hands of a disgrace. The sky hung low, heavy as damp wool, pressing upon the rooftops and glazing the cobblestones with a sheen that reflected every carriage lamp like a trembling star. Lady Eleanor Harcourt stood in the shadow of a narrow townhouse window, watching the rain distort the world beyond the glass. She had always imagined her life collapsing slowly, delicately, like a silk ribbon fraying over years. Instead, it had been torn apart in a single evening, swift, public, and utterly merciless. Word of her father's ruin had spread across drawing rooms faster than any carriage could travel. The failed investment, the unpaid debts, the creditors pounding upon their once respectable door, none of it had been private. Nothing was ever private in London, least of all shame. At the small gathering held the night before, she had felt the shift in the air when she entered, a hush that was not awe but anticipation. Women exchanged glances edged with cruel delight. Men dipped their heads with a polite reserve one used for funerals. Eleanor had never been vain, but she knew when she was being observed as one might study a crushed flower on the path. Something pitiable, perhaps once lovely, now irreparably damaged. Her father had paced the floor that night, muttering apologies between gasps of despair. She had not blamed him. The war had taken much from England and offered few certainties. But she could not ease the tightening fist around her ribs as he described the only remaining solution. Marriage. Not for affection, not for companionship, not even for maintaining appearances, but for survival, his and hers. The man willing to take her, he said, commanded influence, wealth, and a temperament shaped by war. Society named him Duke Alastair Ravenswood, but the whispering crowd preferred another title, the Beast of Blackthorn Hall. The moniker had been born years earlier, shaped by rumors and sharpened by fear. Some claimed he bore scars so ghastly that guests fainted upon seeing him. Others insisted he drove governesses to tears with a single glare. Eleanor had heard the stories as any girl of the ton had, spoken in the same careless tone used for discussing foreign curiosities or tragedies in the paper. Yet none of those tales had prepared her for the knowledge that she was to be tied to the man himself. When her father told her, she felt the room tilt, though she kept her posture as a lady must. Her voice, when she answered, was steady. "If this is the path that remains, then I shall walk it." Her acceptance tasted like surrender, but not cowardice. She had seen enough of society's cruelty to know there were worse fates than marrying a man with a frightening reputation. If a duke wished to break her, at least he would be honest in doing so. The world, on the other hand, preferred to smile as it crushed one's dignity. She met the duke for the first time 3 days later, in a private salon arranged for discussing the marriage settlement. She entered expecting thunderous footsteps, an imposing figure, perhaps even a grimace shaped by war. Instead, she found a man standing by the window, tall and still, the faint afternoon light casting an austere glow across his features. He bore scars, yes, pale ridges along his left cheek, a shadowy wound tracing the line of his jaw, but they were not the grotesque horrors society had described. They were the evidence of a life lived on battlefields, of choices made under cannon fire, not ballroom chandeliers. He turned as she entered. His eyes, cool and gray like storm-touched water, examined her without cruelty. They were unreadable, disciplined, perhaps even cautious. She curtsied. He bowed his head in return. Not a word passed between them for several breaths, yet she felt as though the air itself grew denser under his gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, and unexpectedly gentle. "Lady Eleanor," he began, "I will not insult you with pretense. This arrangement is not born of romance, nor of courtship. It is necessity." His expression did not waver. "But necessity does not require fear from my future duchess." The sentence lingered in the space between them, and Eleanor could not determine whether it was reassurance or warning. She inclined her head, answering with all the dignity she could gather. "Fear is a luxury I can no longer afford, Your Grace." A flicker, just the faintest shift, passed over his eyes. He gestured for her to sit. Their conversation was formal, precise, almost surgical in how it dissected expectations and obligations. Yet beneath every word, Eleanor sensed something unspoken. He did not question her virtue, nor her upbringing, nor the stain upon her family name. Instead, he observed her with a quiet intensity that suggested he was assessing not her beauty, but her resilience. When the meeting ended, the contract lay ready, prepared by lawyers who spoke in stiff, self-important tones. Eleanor's hand trembled only once as she signed, the quill scratching across the parchment like a final severing from her former life. The Duke signed after her, his movements firm and unhesitating. It was done. She rose, feeling the weight of the moment settle like a cloak over her shoulders. Outside the salon, the whispers rushed forward like a tide breaking. "The Harcourt girl is to wed the beast," one voice murmured. "A fair sacrifice for her father's sins," another added. The words pierced her, sharp as needles beneath the skin, yet she did not flinch. She simply stepped toward the waiting carriage, her back straight, her expression serene. As she reached the threshold, the Duke paused beside her. He spoke quietly, the tone meant only for her ears. "This union may be forged by circumstance, Lady Eleanor," he said. "But I assure you, you will not face its consequences alone." She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not a beast, but a man carrying burdens she could not yet name. Something within her shifted, whether fear or hope, she could not say. The rain began again, soft and persistent. She entered the carriage, the door closing behind her with a final, echoing click. When the wheels rolled forward, she realized she was leaving not just her home, but the last remnants of the life she had once imagined. Ahead lay Blackthorn Hall, a marriage of necessity, and a man whose protection she did not yet understand. And though dread whispered its warnings, a strange, fragile curiosity stirred beside it, urging her forward into the unknown. The journey to Blackthorn Hall carried Eleanor through landscapes that shifted from London's grey unrest to the quieter, brooding countryside the Duke called his domain. It was a land of mist and rolling hills, where the sky seemed forever on the verge of rain, and the trees leaned inward as though guarding ancient secrets. Her hands rested in her lap, clasped tightly enough that her knuckles blanched, yet she forced herself to keep her spine straight as the carriage approached the estate. She had imagined a fortress, cold, imposing, perhaps even monstrous, but the reality was unexpectedly different. Blackthorn Hall rose from the earth not as a beast's lair, but as a grand, weathered sentinel, softened by ivy and surrounded by a hush that felt more contemplative than foreboding. As the carriage halted, servants gathered with discreet curiosity, their eyes flicking toward her with a mixture of caution and sympathy. Eleanor stepped out, her boots settling on stone slick with morning dew. Alistair waited a few paces away, hands clasped behind his back, his posture as controlled as ever. For a moment they simply regarded one another, the silence carrying more weight than any greeting. Then he offered his arm, a gesture so unexpectedly refined that it took her a heartbeat too long to respond. His expression did not falter, yet she sensed the faintest release of tension in his shoulders when she accepted. Inside, the grand hall unfolded in subdued splendor. High ceilings arched overhead like the ribs of a cathedral, and a muted tapestry of a battlefield hung above the staircase, its soldiers frozen mid-charge, their faces a blur of valor and anguish. Eleanor's gaze lingered only briefly before Alistair guided her further within. He showed her not to a cramped corner room or austere chamber, but to an airy set of interconnected spaces, a bedroom washed in soft, pale light, a study lined with shelves awaiting her own hand, a private terrace overlooking a garden sculpted with elegant restraint. These were not accommodations for a tolerated wife, but for a duchess whose comfort had been deliberately considered. A household functions best when its mistress possesses both independence and command, he said when she turned toward him, her eyes betraying her surprise. This is your realm, should you wish to shape it. The words struck her with gentle force. She murmured her thanks, and though he merely inclined his head before leaving her to settle in, she sensed he had offered something deeper than rooms or freedom. He had offered respect. Her first formal outing as the new Duchess of Ravenswood arrived sooner than she expected. A winter ball in London, an event attended by those who fed upon gossip with the enthusiasm of vultures descending upon carrion. She travelled with Alistair in a carriage warmed by brazier stones, though the true chill lay not outside but within her chest. He observed her in quiet intervals, as though taking measure of her steadiness. When they arrived, he offered his hand again, and she was startled by the steadiness it lent her. Inside the glittering ballroom, the contrast between the Duke and the crowd was immediate. Chandeliers shed warm light across marble floors and jeweled gowns, but whispers rippled the moment they crossed the threshold. Eleanor felt them, prickling, clinging, weaving poisonous threads around her. "The ruined girl," murmured one voice. "A convenient bride," added another. Pricked but unbroken, she kept her smile serene, though her heart beat with painful clarity. It was not whispers alone that threatened her composure. A rumor, crafted with venomous skill, had circled the room before she even completed her first polite greeting. A forged letter, supposedly written by her father, claimed Eleanor had schemed for the marriage to regain influence. She caught fragments of the slander, each more humiliating than the last. The familiar heat of shame flushed her skin, and she slipped toward the balcony under the guise of needing air. Cold wind greeted her, sharp and bracing, carrying the faint scents of smoke and winter rain. She steadied herself against the railing, her breath a tremor in the night air. Footsteps approached behind her, soft, controlled. She knew even before he spoke. "Did someone wound you?" Alistair's voice was low, not with anger but with a quiet, formidable calm. Eleanor swallowed. "They merely speak what is convenient to believe." He stepped beside her, his gaze sweeping the crowd within. "Convenient lies are the favored currency of weak hearts." His tone darkened, though not toward her. "If they seek to tarnish your name, they shall discover it is not yours alone they challenge." She turned to him, startled by the ferocity of his loyalty. He met her eyes for a long moment, that unreadable gaze softening at the edges. Then, without fanfare, he led her back inside, not shielding her, but walking at her side with such quiet certainty that the whispers dimmed, displaced by a sharper, more curious silence. What followed in the days to come altered the shape of their fragile bond. One evening, Eleanor awoke to faint sounds echoing through the corridor. She followed them to find Alistair braced against a wall, breath uneven, eyes distant with the ghosts of battlefield terror. His scars, usually so still, seemed to pulse with remembered pain. He noticed her, straightened, and attempted to excuse himself with a formality that cracked under the weight of his distress. "You have done nothing wrong," she whispered, stepping closer. "I only wish to help." His jaw tightened. "I do not wish to be seen in such a state." "But you are my husband," she answered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "And I do not fear you." The admission settled between them with a warmth that rivaled any fire. He did not speak, but something shifted, a relinquishing of distance he had long defended. After that night, he sought her company more openly. In shared dinners where he asked her thoughts on estate matters, in quiet walks through the frost-touched gardens, in fleeting glances that lingered just a second too long. Eleanor, in turn, felt the subtle transformations within herself. Where she had expected to shrink, she found herself growing, steadier, braver, warmer. The shift reached a quiet crescendo the night he presented her with a gift, a small, glass-paneled conservatory attached to her terrace, warmed with coal braziers and filled with winter flowers he had personally selected. "You once said you missed color in the cold months," he told her. "I hope this eases the season." Eleanor touched the petals of a pale winter rose, her throat tightening. "You remembered." "I remember more than I speak," he replied, watching her with a depth that made her breath falter. Yet the world, ever vigilant in cruelty, was not finished with them. One afternoon in town, a distant relative of her father, red-faced with drink and desperation, confronted her in the street. His voice rose, demanding money and threatening to expose fabricated improprieties if she refused. Before Eleanor could answer, Alistair stepped between them with a presence that halted every bystander. "My wife owes you nothing," he said, voice crisp with authority. "Her peace is under my protection, and I advise you to consider carefully the consequences of disturbing it." The man retreated, cowed. But London did not miss the spectacle. Pamphlets soon circulated with sensationalized titles, The beast defends his bride. Eleanor felt exposed, yet strangely fortified. For the first time, she realized that the Duke's reputation as a beast was less a truth and more a weapon society wielded to explain what it feared. That evening, a storm swept across the countryside, and Eleanor found Alistair alone in the library, the fire casting molten gold across his profile. She brought him tea, her hand trembling not from fear but from something she dared not name. As she turned to leave, he spoke quietly. "You entered this marriage ready to be broken," he said, his eyes fixed on the flames. "But I would have you believe that no such fate awaits you here." The words unraveled something deep within her, and though she lacked the courage to answer, she remained beside him a moment longer, listening to the storm's steady percussion against the windows. When she left, her pulse still thrummed with his voice. It was not yet love, but it was the beginning of something neither of them could ignore, something fragile and fiercely alive, waiting for its moment to bloom. Winter deepened around Blackthorn Hall, weaving frost across its windowpanes and pressing silence into every corridor. Yet within those stone walls, the distance between Eleanor and Alistair had begun to thaw in ways neither dared to name aloud. Their conversations, once polite exchanges, had grown threaded with unspoken warmth. Their glances, once accidental, lingered with a quiet gravity. And still, despite these fragile shifts, something held both of them suspended just shy of confession. Fear, pride, or perhaps the simple uncertainty that comes when the heart begins to hope again. Eleanor sensed that they were moving toward a precipice, but she could not yet see its depth. One late evening, as the household retired, Eleanor sought solace in the conservatory Alistair had gifted her. Moonlight filtered through the glass, touching the winter roses with a faint silver glow. She brushed her fingertips against a petal, marveling that something so delicate could survive the cold. Behind her, the door opened, and she turned to see Alistair framed in the doorway, cloaked in darkness and the faint scent of cold air. His expression was contemplative, almost hesitant, as though debating whether to speak or retreat. "I did not mean to intrude," he said quietly. "You never intrude," she replied, though her heart had begun to race. She gestured toward the flowers. "They thrive because of you." He stepped into the room, the soft crunch of gravel beneath his boots the only sound. "They thrive because they were given the chance," he murmured. "Sometimes, that is all a thing needs." She wondered if he meant the flowers, or her. Silence unfurled between them, heavy with meaning. Alistair reached out, brushing a leaf as though testing the steadiness of his own hand. Then he turned toward her fully, his gaze unshielded in a way she had never seen. It struck her with the force of something tender yet fierce, as though he had stripped away armor piece by piece and now stood with nothing left but truth. "There is something I must tell you," he said, voice taut with restraint. "Something I have withheld out of fear, though fear is not a sentiment I claim easily." Eleanor's breath caught. She forced herself not to look away. "I have lived under the weight of others' stories," he continued. "Whispers that shaped me into a beast long before I had the chance to prove otherwise. I allowed that mask to harden, believing it easier to carry than disappointment. But since our marriage, I have found myself wishing, against all reason, that you might see something different in me. Something worth your regard." The words uprooted something deep within her, something buried beneath weeks of uncertainty. She took a small step closer, feeling the tremble of her own resolve. "I do see differently," she whispered. "I see a man who stands firm when others falter, who protects without boasting, who feels more deeply than he allows the world to know. A man who deserves far more kindness than he has received." Alistair inhaled as though the air had turned suddenly thin. "You speak as though I am more than a necessity in your life." "You are," she answered, her voice firmer now. "You are no burden, no punishment, no sacrifice. I did not expect to find dignity or gentleness in this marriage, yet you have given me both." His posture softened, but his eyes carried an emotion she could not yet name, aching, uncertain, hopeful. "Eleanor," he said, her name sounding almost like a vow, "you have changed the shape of my quiet world." Before she could respond, The soft thud of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. A servant appeared at the conservatory entrance, flushed from haste. "Your Graces," he stammered. "Forgive the intrusion, but a messenger from London arrived at once. Urgent correspondence." Alistair accepted the sealed letter, his expression tightening as he broke the wax. Eleanor watched his eyes scan the page, watched the faint shift of tension ripple through his jaw. When he looked up, the tenderness from moments earlier had been shadowed by something grave. "There is trouble regarding your father's estate," he said. "A distant cousin has filed a claim challenging your family's remaining holdings. If upheld, it would not only jeopardize what little is left of the Harcourt name but invite legal scrutiny upon you." Eleanor's stomach dropped, the old shame re-emerging like a specter. "They mean to drag my name through the courts." "They mean to drag you through the mud," Alistair corrected, his voice cool as tempered steel. "And I will not permit it." But Eleanor stepped back, shaken. "This began long before you, Alistair. You owe me nothing beyond what our marriage demands." He closed the distance between them with measured precision. "Our marriage demands your protection. It demands your dignity remain intact. And I shall see to both." His certainty steadied her even as dread pooled in her chest. She had known gossip, slander, and whispered cruelty, but the public spectacle of a legal battle threatened something deeper, her hard-earned sense of belonging. Alistair read the fear in her posture and softened. "We will face this together," he said. "Do you understand me?" She nodded, though doubt lingered at the edges of her thoughts. He reached out, not boldly, not claiming, just gently touching her hand in reassurance. The gesture carried more power than any declaration could. She closed her fingers around his and felt the first flicker of courage ignite again. The next days passed in a blur of correspondence and preparation. Solicitors arrived, bringing stacks of documents laden with accusations. Eleanor attended each meeting at Alistair's side, her composure hard-won yet unwavering. She felt his presence like a shield, solid, resolute, silently adamant that she would not face humiliation alone. Their unity unsettled their opponents, who had expected a frightened duchess hiding behind her husband's reputation. They had not expected a woman who held her chin high beside a duke whose calm authority turned every challenge into a warning. One evening, after a particularly grueling session with the legal counsel, Eleanor found herself in the library again, staring at the fire's intricate dance. Stress coiled within her, though she fought to keep it concealed. Alistair entered quietly, carrying a decanter and 2 glasses. He poured for them both, offering her one with a lifted brow. "You held your ground admirably today," he said. "I only did what was required, or had dared hope for. You did more than that. You met their doubt with dignity, and their scorn with grace. I have seen seasoned officers falter under lesser strain." She studied him, struck by the sincerity shaping his words. "You make me sound braver than I feel." "Courage is not the absence of fear," he answered. "It is the will to stand in spite of it. That, Eleanor, you possess in abundance." The firelight threw warm gold across his face, softening the stark lines carved by war and worry. She felt the moment tilting toward something irreversible, her heart beating with a quiet intensity that left no room for doubt. "Alistair," she said softly, "you have given me strength I did not know I had." He stepped closer, his voice low. "And you have given me hope I never expected to feel again." The words settled over her like a warm cloak, dissolving the last of her hesitation. She reached for his hand, not in fear, not in duty, but in a quiet, deliberate act of trust. He closed his fingers around hers, drawing her nearer until she felt the steady rhythm of his breath. Their shared silence became a vow. Not yet spoken, not yet sealed.